Hello and welcome. We have a fairly convincing new theory about how the attack on Nord Stream pipelines might have happened. And we hear more about Russian infighting and Prigozhin trying to keep his relevance, including even going to the front line. This and more about the current developments on the war in Ukraine, about international support, the developments on the front line in this situation report. Now we start with this article here by Oliver Alexander, who is a OSINT reporter, and he has checked numerous data that he found, mostly the transponder of ships. In comparison, not only did he more or less prove that Seymour Hersh's story is pure fiction, he has also found a lot of data about ships that were in the regions of the explosion. To summarize it quickly, he believes that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which blew up here in the south, was actually an accident caused by faulty production that was rushed due to the coming sanctions by the Americans and due to time lost during a storm. And when that one pipeline burst, the Russians were in panic and knew that the explosive charges they had set on Nord Stream 1 would be found in a revision, so they blew them. The whole story means that blowing up Nord Stream 1 made perfect sense for Russia because it was shut down and they didn't want to deliver anymore. And by blowing it up without showing any proof that it's an act of war, it would mean that they don't have to pay for anything, that they don't have to pay the fees if they don't deliver, and that they might even get insurance money, while Nord Stream 2 made no sense for the Russians, as they could use both pipelines, not just one, to keep delivering to Germany under a complete new contract, which would then obviously have the ability to completely tilt it in the Russian favor. Now, this didn't explain why one pipeline would burst, while one pipe of the two pipes of Nord Stream 2 burst, and why it would burst so far away from Nord Stream 1. But Oliver Alexander has given us here the story how this might have happened, as there are some misunderstandings on YouTube I'm encountering all the time. Theories are just theories. They are no proof whatsoever. In theory, everyone is still a possible suspect, from the United States to Germany to Poland to Ukraine to Russia or to the Catholic Church, if you want to include it. In theory, this is it, but this is, as of now, this seems to be the most convincing story that I've found so far, especially as it is the available data supports the story to that degree, at least, where we can say, okay, in itself, from what we can see, it kind of makes sense. I'm going to link the article to you in the comment section, so check the pinned comment under it, find this article. Let's come to the overall situation in the war in Ukraine. We currently have Putin is having public appearances in the last few days. In one speech, for instance, he said that it's currently a fight for Russia's historic borders and for the Russian people, which obviously means that, completely interpreted, uh, Russian expansionism will not be limited to Ukraine. Because Russian borders have historically been, if you include the Tsarist Russia, deep inside of Poland. They have included Central Asia, including Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and others. Russian people are living in most of those countries. In most of countries that are bordering Russia, they have a significant Russian-speaking minority. And if Putin takes this as an excuse, then basically most of its neighbors inside of Europe and Central Asia have to be afraid of Russian in the future. The Ukrainians are expecting a false flag attack in the region of Chernihiv, up here. There are reports by the Ukrainians that they've seen unmarked military convoys with Russian soldiers in Ukrainian uniforms. The Ukrainians are expecting that there could be a false flag attack coming to pull Belarus into the war, as Lukashenko, the Belarusian dictator, has said that he will not join the war unless Ukrainian soldiers come and kill his people, as he said it. Obviously, the easiest way to then use Belarus in this way would be give the appearance of the Ukrainians attacking, even though the Belarusian military doesn't really have to be taken too seriously. Should Belarus mobilize, then several hundred thousand troops might help Russia in this regard. And obviously, even if they don't do an invasion in Ukraine itself, if the Belarusian forces are increasing along the border, Ukraine will have no choice but to do the same. So they will fix massive Ukrainian troops in this region should there be any sign of Belarus entering the war after all. This regard, a false flag attack would make perfect sense, at least if Russia is able to sell it to Belarus in a way and to Lukashenko, or Lukashenko is accepting this false flag attack for political reasons as reality. So far, I have not had any reports of anything happening, but as said, Ukraine is afraid that this might be happening. Putin has voided a decree, has cancelled, basically publicly said that this decree is no longer valid from 2012, in which he ordered the Russian Foreign Ministry to find a peaceful solution in the Transnistria conflict that would include the territorial integrity of Moldova. Now, this is important in this regard, as Transnistria is a breakaway republic that was supported by Russia. The breakaway republic is only in existence because of Russian military protection. And in the past, Russia, since 2012, supported officially that this part should somehow be reintegrated into Moldova, while obviously giving the Russian speakers there some rights. Now this has changed. Putin is no longer officially aiming for this solution, and at the same time, the Russians are saying Ukraine wants to invade Transnistria and conquer it. They want to start a war there. The Russian Ministry of Defense was saying Ukrainians in Russian uniforms would start by simulating a Russian offensive into Ukraine from Transnistria to give Ukraine the pretext. So basically, the Russians are accusing the Ukrainians from preparing a false flag attack out of Transnistria. If this attack was to happen, obviously that would justify a Ukrainian self-defense into Transnistria and would then allow Ukraine to conquer it, which should not take too much time in general, as the area, as you can see, is extremely thin, and on the side towards Ukraine, big parts of the border uh, are not separated by a river as the other side, as towards Moldova, and that would allow the Ukrainians to partition the Transnistrian controlled areas and then reduce them one by one. Generally, though, this is Moldovan sovereign territory, so Ukraine won't enter into this, and it would take Ukrainian troops that could be used in some other places. That seems to be the Russian intention here. At least that what makes the most sense to me, that Russia tries to provoke Transnistria into mobilizing out of fear for their existence in regards to a potential Ukrainian invasion. The Transnistrian military itself is not that fearsome, with calculations going from 6 to 8,000, but officially they claim to have a reserve of 35,000 additional men. So in total, they could mobilize of over 40,000 in case of a general mobilization, maybe even more. The armaments industry there has been sizable too, so they should at least be able to arm those people with assault rifles and light anti-tank weapons. Should Transnistria mobilize, should it actually come to this, then it would obviously be highly unpleasant for Ukraine, as even 40,000 badly equipped hostile forces on their border would leave them no choice significantly reinforce their own presence along the border with Transnistria as well, and then again fixing troops there, especially as an advance in the direction of Odessa cannot be tolerated. The risk of this is too high. It all comes with fears that there might be a Russian invasion into Moldova itself. The theories are that the Russians could do air assault, flying over southern Ukraine and then into Chisinau, the capital of Moldova. Moldovan armed forces are weak. Again, roughly 6,000 men. No reserve, no significant reserve. Speak of no significant heavy weapons to speak of. Moldova has pledged to resolve the Transnistria problem peacefully. Nobody else was threatening them, so they had no need to up a serious armed forces. And in this regard, should the Russians actually air assault forces taking over Chisinau might be a possibility, even though it seems highly unlikely. It would be close to impossible for the Russians to force it without heavy losses, as transport planes would have to fly over hostile territory, and that's not something that is very successful in the long run without losses. So the likelihood of a Russian invasion into Moldova is a discussion that is spread around, but at least from my opinion, seem too likely. The whole talk about false flag attacks, though, makes perfect sense for the Russians. As I said, in case Transnistria does mobilize, it would weaken the Ukrainians, would fix tens of thousands along the border that cannot be used in other regions at the same time. The Eastern Front, we have a new attack of Russians over the international border. This time, Olohivka has been attacked. Here, it seems that it was more like a sabotage troop, reconnaissance troop, so apparently no big force, probably just a couple of men. I haven't even read of reports that they had vehicle support. It might just have been infantry, but they did cross the border, went into Ukrainian territory until the Ukrainians were able to repulse them. Again, a sign that the Russians do their best to fix Ukrainian troops along the whole border, where they can go cross at will, and the Ukrainians don't really dare to cross themselves. Other than that, we have continued significant attacks by the Russians along the front line, but the successes the Russians have achieved in the last 3 days that I can confirm are very, very limited. We have some reports of minor Ukrainian losses in territory or Russian gains close to Novovodiane, which is here. Other than that, I cannot confirm any further advances. There are some claims. Some claims are like 5 kilometers at Crimea, but it seems that those are outdated and might include the actual advances that have happened a week ago in the direction of Torske. Apart from that, I cannot confirm any further advances over south of the Siversky Donetsk. We have continued attacks on Bilohorivka, but Bilohorivka is still standing strong. It's not getting conquered. North in the Balch here, north of Bakhmut, we have attacks in the north, and some of them seem to have minor advances in territory here, minor gains, but nothing too significant. We have some advances along the E40, the road here from Bakhmut, Kramatorsk, and Sloviansk. Again, the Russians seem to mostly focus on eastern and northern front towards Bakhmut, while there are some reports of Russian attacks in the direction of Ivanivske and some Russian claims that Ivanivske is actually reached. I cannot confirm that fully, so the map here actually show that maybe this is a part of Ivanivske here. The front doesn't seem to have moved too much in the direction of the T0405. That's the route here from Bakhmut to the west. The northern line of communication is cut now for several days. The southern one should be more or less cut as well, at least more or less unusable, which leaves the main line of communication here from Bakhmut in the direction of Chasiv Yar. So we are still expecting the Ukrainians to prepare for an evacuation, even though they are still holding as of now. In Bakhmut itself, there are reports of Russian advances. They seem to creep forward slowly in house-to-house fighting. Now and then we have new geolocations which show the Russians another block forward into Bakhmut. So in general, we can say the Russians are advancing into Bakhmut, but they're advancing fairly slowly. Other than that, we have attacks around Avdiivka. Avdiivka, the fighting continues here. No confirmed changes in the control of territory by either side, though. And around Marinka, the fighting is also continuing. But here we have signs that the Russians have actually advanced somewhat in the direction of Pobieda. The Russian military bloggers claim that the Russians have switched towards an attempt to bypass Marinka to force a Ukrainian withdrawal, as obviously house-to-house fighting, which is lasting for a full year now in Marinka, has still not delivered them the results of capturing the whole city itself. Other than that, we We have continued fighting around Volidar. Not much changes is happening here. There might be some positional change side of the town that I can't fully confirm, but there is no reports, no visual proof. Russians advancing inside of Volidar or in a serious process of bypassing it as well. On the southern front line, we have in Zaporizhia reports of a surprise attack in the direction of Kamyansk. It was defeated. Other than that, no major news apart from shelling along the Dnipro and, of course, along the whole front line. Nothing here, but in general, not much changed. When it comes to the general situation, the whole situation is still, unfortunately, pretty unsure. I listened to Michael Kaufman, an expert that I can wholeheartedly recommend. And in a recent podcast, he said he believes that the 150,000 reserve troops are still not deployed. There were talks that the Russians have not deployed all of their mobilized personnel, but 150,000 are still kept in reserve. And he says they are still there. So, and they are still not deployed, but he expects that they are going to be pushed into the fight bit by bit, and just to basically reinforce what is going on and not any major change in the development along the front line itself. He doesn't believe that using them will deliver any significant successes to the Russians. He actually says the Russian offensive now is an advantage for the Ukrainians, as both sides were aiming to do their own offensive. And with Ukraine having the ability to wait out the Russian offensive and blunt them, that means that their own reserves then will have it easier afterwards to attack the Russian positions, and that the Russians will have a much harder time to counterattack themselves into a weak Ukrainian position once the Ukrainian offensive is coming. Generally, there are still massively contradicting news, though. So while Michael Kaufman, who I consider a serious expert on the topic, is saying that the Russians have 150,000 in reserve, we have the GUR head Budanov, I think Brigadier General. I think he was now promoted to Major General. I'm not completely sure, but he said he's the head of the military intelligence of Ukraine, and he's saying that Russia has actually is already using 90% of its mobilized personnel, which would leave like 35,000 left in reserve, not the 150,000 that Michael Kaufman is expecting. He's also saying Russia is now down to 30% of its stock in artillery ammunition. That's why we see signs of Russians saving artillery ammunition to focus the available stocks on the areas they concentrate most, so mostly direction here of Crimea West, Bakhmut, and in the south of Volidar, whereas, for instance, areas like Dnipro have seen a much lower volume of artillery fire than was expected, and we've seen a lot of incendiary ammunition there, which would explain that it's more or less artillery there is being used to keep the Ukrainians busy, not to actually support an advance in this regard. So it makes sense to use shells that aren't that useful fighting for Bakhmut on a secondary front. So he believes the Russians are down to 30% of their stocks, but he's saying the Russians have already imported grenades from Iran and they're trying to buy more. And the Russians are also, because of the lack of both artillery as well as equipment, increasingly switching from artillery fire, artillery bombardment, heavy shelling that is followed by mechanized advances to infantry assaults, which we are reading for quite a number of time already, which we're hearing about. Media is usually calling it human wave attacks, even though I don't personally think it's properly fitting, as a human wave would probably be more than 20 to 30 men attacking. But the means of Russians' attacks are, according to Budanov, increasingly down to pure infantry without heavy support, even have occasional videos still obviously using mechanized forces. He says that Russian plans to build 800 tanks a year are unrealistic. He expects the Russian to not be able to build those plans, and Russia right now can produce, according to him, 40 cruise missiles a month, which is more or less the volume of the past attacks we've seen against Ukraine. In 2 or 3 attacks have been more or less around this volume, around this size. So the overall air assault, the shelling, the attacks against the Ukrainian hinterland should thus be used over time. Russian stocks in precision ammunition and long-range precision ammunition is massively. On the Crimea, from the Crimea, we have news from the Russian side, which are saying the Kerch Bridge is now repaired, so ahead of schedule. It's fully restored to its capacity, from what they're saying. And we have news from the Crimea as well, where partisans have been active here in Bakhchisarai, here close to Sevastopol. Train track has been damaged and it stopped some train traffic here, but supposedly that was a Ukrainian partisan attack. When it comes to the mobilization, we have interesting pictures here now. I'm not sure it's properly visible. It probably isn't, but let me show you. It's a BTR-80 that you see here. So BTR-80s are old BTR-50, not 80. BTR-50s are old previous APCs that were built in the 50s and 60s, that seen extensive service worldwide and are now appearing on territory by Russians. And we actually have a Russian military blogger also talking about them here. And it's should not be overstated in my book, but it's at the same time, it still is a sign. Now, the likelihood of those BTR 50s better shape than other stored, more modern IFVs is weird, at least. But it might be due to disorganization from the Russians, that, for instance, those BTRs were kept in hangars and buildings, while BMP ones were kept outside and thus have to be restored much more extensively. Whether that means that the Russians are already useless equipment should not really included out of it, as it is a APC general by its design, so it's meant for transporting, not to actually fight with them. You can transport up to 20 soldiers, which are then covered against shrapnel and against light projectiles. In this regard, it can be of perfect use to shuttle troops around close to the front line. Whether the Russians are going to use it for this as like a taxi, drives troops towards the front line in better protected than in a truck, where it would be an improvement if they have used trucks before, or whether they are going to press them some kind of service as IFV. So to actually support the attack, to transport the troops in and support fire, will be the big question. In first case, it makes perfect sense, and it doesn't really matter that the APC there, that the R50 might be 60 years old. Doesn't matter that much, 60 or even 70 years old. If they use it actually as an IFV, drastic sign of the Russians actually running out of sufficient amounts of equipment to fulfill their role, and lead to high losses on the Russian sides, as those vehicles are neither made to efficiently support troops in battle, so at least to give the necessary firepower to support, nor are they take any themselves, apart from machine gun and some artillery shrapnel from hits in 50-meter distance or something. According to Russian sources, the time that is used to train doctors is Russia as well, supply more medical personnel to the front line. That will be in accordance to I think it was the last situation report where I said that, or some ago, where I mentioned the British analysis from the Ministry of Defense that the ratio of fatal losses, of fatal casualties, is higher than it should be on the Russian side. They attributed to bad medical care. Obviously, increasing the number of doctors along the front line should mitigate that a little, and supposedly the Russians are trying to do that now. They call orthopedics surgeons, traumatologists, anesthesists, that their training is being reduced to send them to the war earlier, at an early time. We also have here some article or the mention of an article from the New York Times. Unfortunately, I actually, it is, have it here. Um, the, according to it, Russians are planning to several 100,000 additional troops. Uh, that is the of the from the American side. Russia will call up more and more people, which is obvious that if we are talking about that, the current offensive might actually be to the limit the Russians can do right now, then they'll obviously need more personnel, and Russians are actively trying their size of the forces according. And we have some disturbing news here from Vladivostok. Mayor's office of Vladivostok, according to this channel, I think it's opposition media, was handing out sausage packages to the relatives of fallen. So from an official government side to ease the pain, receive sausages when they've lost a family member in the fight. And Vladivostok is one of the bases for the naval brigades that have been torn apart several times or already. So losses personnel in should be. When it comes to the political sphere, we have the Financial Times quoting Kremlin sources, according to which Putin is believing that the West is far less convinced, far less dedicated to winning the war than Russia. And also he believes that Russia could ride out the sanctions, which are again signs that there is no room for any negotiations that are more than capitulation negotiations. As Putin is believing that he will win the war and that he can win the war, and so for him, there is no incentive to actually give in parts if he believes that he can win in the end. Medvedev, who was his you call him predecessor and successor, the guy with whom he switched posts for a Russian president for a while to change the constitution to be able to allow him to stay in power. He's now the deputy head of the Security Council, and he's making waves for separation of the war as being hardliner. He now said Russia would push back every threatening borders, even if it's the borders of Poland. Basically, he claims that if necessary, Russia will make Poland smaller to use the Russian territory to make it. Irkin, whom I quote quite a lot here, is a Russian hardline nationalist, but is very critical of his own government, even though his reasons are that he wants the war to be fought harder and he wants general mobilization and all of this. But he basically mocked Medvedev and he said it's absolutely ridiculous, the claims Russian forces can't even succeed in Ukraine as of now. Prigozhin was again using the Ministry of Defense, Russian Ministry of Defense, that his fighters were only receiving 20% of the ammunition that was promised to him, which causes unnecessary losses. And after several military bloggers were joining the outcry, the next day he was able to say that now his needs are being fulfilled, and he thanked individuals. So supposedly he will call out individuals are helping Russian Ministry of Defense still fail its job. And after this is interesting in several ways because Russian Ministry of Defense is no longer talking about Wagner and Prigozhin. They are talking about volunteers in assault detachments instead of Wagner when it comes to them, to basically try to push him to the sidelines and make him relevant. But his connection in the military blogger scene to be so high that he can actually rouse enough attention and get enough support to still get his way, at least to a certain way. It should become unpleasant for the Russian Ministry of Defense over time, but we will have to see. And he's making sure that he's kept in the spotlight. Here he has been actually visiting frontline. We see him here, assault rifle on his chest. He's visiting Wagner. See his bodyguards looking around in all directions, and it was geolocated. That was actually 500 meters frontline. So when it comes to taking risks to booster his importance, cannot be accused of cowardice. At least this much can be said in this. When it comes to the international support, we have new reports here from Poland. Poland is delivering 60 P91 Twardy, which are modernized, much more capable T7M that initially had. They were actually, this is not a new delivery, but they were promised months and a half ago, and they're just being handed over to the Ukrainians now. So this is not an additional delivery that was confirmed. There's also this was the Minister of Defense of Sweden. He was confirming Sweden is giving 10 Stridswagen 122. He calls them Leopard 2A5 here, which are basically Stridswagen 122 are Leopard 2A5s with some domestic systems and some added armor. So there was an argument that the Stridswagen 122 was the best Leopard in the world at that time, and as it basically made the 2A5 even better. They're giving 10 of them to Ukraine and 50 CV90. CV90 is interesting because it's an IFV, but it carries at least it can carry different weapons, but the Swedish version, the one they are delivering, should carry a 40 millimeter L70 Bofors autocannon, which is extremely powerful and can threaten even Russian main battle tanks from the side at sizable distances. We're talking about over a kilometer, where it has the potential to destroy Russian main battle tanks from the side and at least make a mission kill from the front and take out significant optics and stuff like this when shooting at them from the front. So they have to be drawn and the CV90 is an extremely powerful IFV, and Sweden is going to deliver 50 of them to Poland, to Ukraine, and they are also talking about delivering Hawk. I have it here, the Hawk air defense system, basically obsolete, but it's getting delivered now for quite some time towards Ukraine from, I think it was Sweden, and now Sweden, but it was Spain and the US. Big advantage here is that there are huge stocks of it available, and while it might not be as potent against combat jets, against modern combat jets, as more modern systems, it is still very capable to shoot down suicide drones, to shoot down cruise missiles. In this regard, especially if no active countermeasures are employed, the system is still fairly capable. And here, Sweden will also have Ukrainians to the system. The German journal Der Spiegel was saying that Russia is currently negotiating with a Chinese drone manufacturer about the delivery of 100 CT-180 drones. Those should be more or less something like the Shahid drones, because the Spiegel was saying have a 35 to 50 kilogram warhead, which is more or less I think it should be a little bigger than the Shahid 136, but it's basically suicide drones, and the Russians are supposedly talking about the production and delivery with a Chinese company, but obviously that has to go through Chinese government, so we'll see if the United States can. Finally, before we finish, we have an discovery here. We see a Chinese assault rifle in Ukraine on the Ukrainian side, and the conclusion by the publisher here, publishing is Pakistan, which seems fairly likely, and the rifle was likely in that case sold to the US by Pakistan. Pakistan is already selling significant amount of weapons to the US, who then hands it over to Ukraine. Pakistan, being a fairly poor country, is obviously not caring too much about legal ramifications of selling weapons in this regard. They need money, and if somebody's giving it to them, they'll take it. The UBZ-95 usually is chambered in 5.8, which doesn't have, which only China has. Maybe some other nations they've handed it to, but there is an export version in 5.56, so 203, which seems then likely this is a version using this NATO standard caliber, of which Ukraine is now having and using a lot. Unfortunately, we can't see the magazine on this picture, so in this regard, I can't say which exact version, but the most likely version chambered in is compatible choices. Big part of us given to you. That's it for me for now. What do you think about Prigozhin? Do you think he's gonna manage to stay relevant, or is he going to fall out of a window really soon? And what do you think about the court? Will Ukraine be able to punch? So see, leave it in the comments. Leave us your opinion in the comments. Also help with the algorithm, and if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Also, other than that, this channel is only possible because of support from viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can go by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icons, your videos. Want to help the channel grow. You can also recommend it to friends and acquaintances. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and